when you left in August?
I can't remember.
You probably were. I'm trying to do a chapter a week, even though I've been out of town or saved a few times, and a few times we did half chapters. So I was planning on getting through it in 24 weeks, so yeah, that's over half a year. I'm sure we probably were. So we're up to Acts chapter 24. A lot of them, like last week, we were in Acts chapter 23. Didn't even make it through the end of the lesson. But instead of just picking up and continuing the last few verses, just move on, or else it's going to just take forever. So, Paul has been arrested in Jerusalem after his third missionary journey. Remember, he collected offerings from the Gentiles, and he wanted to come down, and people were warning him, bad things are going to happen, and prophets were telling him, you're going to be arrested and imprisoned. But he purposed that it was the Lord's will that he go, and so he went ahead and went, and it wasn't there. It looks like to me, by the dialogue and stuff, he wasn't even there but like a couple of days, and he got arrested in the temple and got a chance to defend himself immediately, and on the stairs, talked to the people there that were gathered there that had caused his arrest by kind of this tumult in the temple area, and he gave his defense and told them who he was and how his education and how he was a Jew and persecuted Christians, and then he met Jesus and he continued to talk to him, and then when he got to the part where he said God was sending him as a missionary to the Gentiles, that made them all mad, and they started throwing things and tearing their clothes and things, so the guards carried him into the castle there and the fortress that was near the temple, and now they've got to decide what to do with him, and didn't have anything to charge him with, really, because when they asked the people what he did wrong, they were all shouting out different answers. They couldn't even agree on what he did wrong. So Claudius, the captain there, didn't know what to do, so he decided the best thing to do is, hey, I'm going to just send him up to Caesarea to Felix, and let somebody above my pay grade take care of this Paul problem, because I don't know what to do with him. And he was in danger of getting in trouble with Roman law by mistreating a Roman citizen. You're not allowed to arrest and hold a Roman citizen without charges and things like that. They were very well protected by the law. The law is one of the things that the Romans left us that is the most important enduring thing about their culture, that they left on earth. They aren't the ones that invented it and didn't start it, but they had gotten it down to a pretty very well organized. You might say they'd gotten it down to a science, and that's the biggest thing, that lasted from their legacy is the spirit of the law. And the first person in Roman law was the citizen. That was what it was there for, to protect them, and it was the responsibility of the state and the courts to protect the citizens. And before that time, that was pretty rare, wasn't it? And even in today's world, in a lot of cultures, that's pretty rare for that to be the purpose of the law, is to put the citizen first. So, of course, there was all kinds of corruptions and things that kept it from working like it should, but for the most part, that was what it was set up to do. And you can see in the story of Paul, in the way he appeals, and all the way up to Caesar, and in the way that when he gets arrested, he tells them he's a Roman citizen, and then they're like, oh man, we're going to let him go because we beat this guy not knowing he's a Roman citizen, we're going to get in trouble. That's happened 2 or 3 times during his missionary journeys, and you can see in this last chapter 23, the benefits of being a Roman citizen, just by saying, I'm a Roman citizen. All of a sudden he's treated very differently than if he was just a regular old, Jew or non-Roman. And so, this is what Claudius did. He decided, hey, I'm going to send him to Caesarea, and they can deal with him there. And there was a plot against his death that they discovered by Paul's sister and son, and they came and told Claudius about it. So he sent him under cover of night with a big old group of soldiers. So Paul arrives at Caesarea. This is where Felix is like this. The governorship was the seat, was his seat in his, palace or whatever there in the city of Caesarea. And so chapter 24, if you want to read with me, we'll start off with the first 9 verses. It says, "And after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders, and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear of us thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and whom we have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things, whereof we accuse him. And of the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so." And so Paul has arrived at Caesarea, and in 5 days, only took 5 days for the Jewish leaders to bring their prosecutor Tertullus, the slick-talking lawyer, right? You can already see that, right? What does he start out with? Flattery, doesn't he? And, "Oh, you're the great leader." And the Jews hated these guys' guts. Hated him. They were controlling their lives and mean to them, and they don't have any rights. So you can see the silver-tongued, just in those first few verses. And you wonder, why do lawyers get a bad reputation, You see, they're considered bottom feeders and sleazy, and you've heard it said that 99% of lawyers give the other 1% a bad reputation. And I know a couple of lawyers. I've got a couple of lawyers. They're neighbors. They both seem like really nice guys. And as far as I know, most of them, they're not really like criminal defense lawyers. They do the deeds and the contracts and filing things at the courthouse. And they do court things too. Don Shaw's my next door neighbor. He was telling me the other day some of the stuff he did, and he had a docket the next day. And I've sat in his office before and heard people come in and talking to the receptionist and with real bad problems. They need help, And so I think a lot of them are pretty good guys, but seems like quite a few of them. For one thing, they get a bad reputation for defending people that they know are guilty. People and it's their right by law to have a lawyer and be a defense. We understand that, but it'd be hard for me to do that, though, to somebody who, especially did something really heinous, to try to defend them. I just couldn't bring myself to do that, and a lot of people couldn't do it. But, somebody has to do it, right? It's their right to have a defense, but in some of them, the ambulance chaser types that, I remember when MJ got hurt, and he was in the hospital, and he was just so critical. His brain was swollen, and there was, went down there several times to visit him, and just so close to life or death. And here comes this lawyer from Idabel showing up at the hospital room, wanting to sue the state because they hadn't put the signage up or something, or the signage was wrong where he had a wreck or something. It was on that North Bypass when they had just built it. They had just opened it. It was just freshly opened. Anyways, it just kind of, that kind of stuff kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Of course, not all of them like that, but you can see Tertullus is one of those guys. He's flattering. He's lying through his teeth to somebody he absolutely hates, telling them how great he is and how thankful they are for him. And then, of course, he proceeds to lie about Paul, doesn't he? He brings false accusations. There's a verse in Proverbs I was going to read to you. It's Proverbs 26:28. Got the big Bible, it's harder to turn around and turn quickly to find things. Proverbs 26:28 says, "A lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin." And so there's something about a flattering mouth that's really distasteful to us, isn't it? You see that, kind of with politicians sometimes, speaking out of both sides of their mouth. You see that with, just people that we consider creepy, don't you? Some guy trying to talk some girl into, going out with him with flattery, and it just seems creepy when it comes across that way. But sometimes we might be susceptible to it without even realizing it, because it's nice to be complimented, isn't it, sometimes? And you don't realize maybe the intentions of somebody doing that might not be the best. And that's one of the things that's so bad about flattery too, isn't it? It's sneaky, it's deceit, it's used most of the time deceitfully and trickily. So we don't want to be tricked by somebody trying to use flattery against us to get in our good graces. Then they're going to start asking favors or whatever their aim is for us. But it's also ugly to see it just in writing like this. There's something about it just creepy and distasteful and gross. So it's something the Bible does warn us about, though. Be careful, because people will come into your life sometimes and use that tactic to try to, try to, I don't know, coerce you or get you to something to do it. And sometimes that's no doubt, something the devil can use. So always be on your guard about that kind of stuff. And you can tell that it's probably most likely works in this situation the way that Tertullus is using it against these, these statesmen and politicians and stuff like that. They probably like to hear that. And it's probably effective, and that's why Tertullus uses it, because he's a smart, even though he's sleazy and lying, he's a good, good at persuading people and good at doing what he does. And so he's bringing 3 charges against Paul. He's got a personal charge. Basically, this man is a pestilent fellow. Then a political charge that basically he's charging him with sedition and leading an illegal religion. And then a doctrinal charge that he's profaning the temple. And so, as far as Paul being a pest, it's kind of, depends on your point of view. The Jews wanted to maintain their ancient traditions and have their status quo. And we talked about many times, by the time Jesus arrived on the scene, Jews didn't believe what the Old Testament taught anymore. They had transformed into just a works-based religion. You have to do this, this, and this to get saved. And that's not what the Old Testament taught. And Jesus and Paul and the apostles, they all fought against that the whole time. But to them, that was pestilent, wasn't it? He was getting in there, changing people, going into synagogues, and preaching the gospel of Christ. Many people were getting saved. He would go to other places and cause riots. And there was a famous preacher, I don't remember his name, he's in here in my essential book, somewhere said that everywhere Paul went, he either caused a revival or a riot. And that's kind of true from what we've been going through his missionary journeys, isn't it? And so the personal charge, was based on his, what we just said, some of the Paul's conflict with him. So when he went to places like Ephesus and, some of these other places, it wasn't the Romans that were having problems with it. It was the Jews. And so the Jews were the ones that were really causing the problems, weren't they? And the tumults, not Paul, because they disagreed with what he was doing. But that was based on what he had done in places like that. And then the political charge was a lot more serious because these Roman officials had to take it seriously. They didn't want to be known as somebody that was permitting a rebel or somebody, with seditious, tendencies. They didn't want their reputation to be that I'm the guy that was easy on that kind of people. So that would have, anything that would have upset the peace, Rome was against. So that was was probably taken very seriously. And Tertullus knew that, and so he mixes in, a little bit of truth, because he did preach to the Jews, and he did, people did react strongly to it and things like that. But he twisted it in with lies, of course. And it also involved a Roman officer. It says in verse number 7, but the chief captain Lysias came upon us and with great violence took him away out of our hands. So he kind of twisted the truth there. He didn't take him with great violence. He came and just arrested him and took him, right? And protected him from the crowd. And so he's not only exaggerating things against Paul, but he's exaggerating things against a good Roman officer. And so, he tried to make the Jews look good and, without making the Romans look too bad, but he did, he had to be careful, tread carefully through that. And so he also softened the charge. They charged him with profaning the temple. There, if you saw that in verse number 6. And originally, that's not what they charged him was. They charged him with taking a Gentile into the court where only the Jews could take, which was worthy of death. And profaning is just saying something bad about it, cussing the temple or whatever, bad mouthing the temple. So they had softened it just so they could try to make it stick better. And so, the original accusation in chapter 21 was he polluted the temple, and now he's saying profaned. So they, he couldn't substantiate it either because there was no witnesses. The people from Asia there that claimed they saw him take the Gentile into the court, they had already dispersed. They weren't there anymore. And so you couldn't substantiate that with witnesses. And so, also like we already said, they were changing their stories and each saying different things. And so he couldn't substantiate the polluting the temple, but profaning the temple could be more hearsay and things like that. So anyways, the Jews had authority to arrest and prosecute people who violated Jewish law, but Paul was a Roman citizen, right? So they couldn't just roll him through that. So he's being protected and appealing to the Romans. All right. So that's Tertullus. The next part is you get Paul's answer to that, and that's starting in verse number 10, going down through 21. So let's read that. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, "Forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the most cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogue, nor in the city. Neither can they prove these things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. And herein do I exercise myself, and do always to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. Now, after many years I came to bring alms to my nation in offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee, and object if they had aught against me, or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me while I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice, that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day." And so the governor could have examined Paul and asked him questions, but instead he just beckoned to him and let him, give his, I guess you'd call it an opening statement maybe. And he didn't flatter Felix like Tertullus did, but he acknowledged that he was a man of experience and knowledge. And so he proceeded to address the charge. As far as the temple charge is concerned, Paul was just there to worship. Remember when he got there, the whole reason he went to the temple was because the leaders of the Jerusalem church met him and said, "Listen, there's all these rumors going around about you and the Gentiles, that you're, letting them, laxing on the law," and they gave him some examples, and so just to strengthen your position, to make sure you're still with us and believe the same as us, they had this idea: why don't you go to the temple with these 4 guys that took a Nazirite vow, and you're going to give offerings with them, just to kind of show that you're still one of us, to kind of fight against these false rumors that are going around. And so he said, okay, that sounds fun, because he wanted to unite the Jews with the Gentiles, right? That was one of his purposes for going back. He brought a big offering from them because they were destitute and need, and then he wanted to, he wanted the church not to have a Jewish church and a Gentile church, right? We want these people to all worship the same and love the same God together, and not the separation. So, in that end, he's agreed. Okay, I'll go to the temple. And it sounds like it was the very next day after he got to Jerusalem. And that's where the Jews from Asia Minor started lying about it, screaming and hollering, causing a big tumult. But that wasn't why he was there. He was just there to worship, right? He was just there, to quietly go about his business. He wasn't preaching the gospel or anything, just sitting there minding his own business. And so, this is day 13 since then. Time is going fast. The first day he arrived in Jerusalem, met with James and the elders in the temple the next day, and I guess he was in the temple 3 days, it says. I didn't know that. And then he was arrested, met with the Jewish council on day 7, threatened on day 8 with his life. Those Jews took a vow they weren't going to eat until they killed him. And then he was taken to Caesarea on day 8. Day 9 arrived there. Day 10, he waited. Day 11, he was waiting for the Jewish leaders to arrive. And then by day 13, the hearing was conducted. So from the time he left, the coast of Tyre, where he prayed with the Christians and got to Jerusalem, it's only been a couple of weeks. And here he is in Caesarea, already been through a couple of trials. And, so this is going by pretty fast up till now. But after now, it's going to go by slow. He's going to get stuck in Caesarea for 2 whole years. And so, now he's disposed of the temple charges. He's going to deal with the charges of sedition and heresy. And so, the Sadducees, if you remember when the Sadducees and Pharisees met, right? The day after with Claudius Lysias. And all they had to do was mention the resurrection. They got into a big scuffle, and that ended that, right? And that's what happened before he came to Caesarea. The Sadducees accepted the first 5 books of Moses, but none of the rest of it. They didn't accept the Psalms and the Proverbs and the prophets and the history, all that. And so they didn't believe in the resurrection. They said it couldn't be found anywhere in the books that Moses wrote. But Jesus had already refuted that argument. Look at Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. You will remember this when we start reading here. Okay, this is the one about the man with the woman that marries all the brothers, remember? Verse 22-23 says, the same day came into him the Sadducees, which say that there is no resurrection, and asked him, saying, Master, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed to his brother. Now there were with us 7 brethren. And the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, having no issue, left his wife to his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third unto the 7th. And the last of all, the woman died also. Therefore in the resurrection, whose wife shall it be of the 7? For they all had her. Remember, these guys don't even believe in the resurrection. They're just trying to, this is their best trick to try to fool Jesus into admit he's wrong, right? So verse number 29, Jesus answered and said to them, ye do err, not knowing of the scriptures, nor the power of God, which is a huge insult. They're supposed to be the expert on the scriptures, right? For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read, which is spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine. Just by pointing out the tense of the verb I am, in the Old Testament first 5 books of Moses, it proves that he's not the God of the dead. He didn't say I was Abraham's God. I am Abraham's God today, right now. And so he had already refuted, but of course they didn't answer him back. They didn't have any, life change, paradigm shift, anything like that. No, they just ignored it, right? Kept going their way. And at their own peril, right? And so, Paul didn't see, back in Acts, in these early Christians, they didn't see themselves as a separate, religion from Jewish, right? They didn't see themselves as former Jews, but as fulfilled Jews, right? They're actually still follow the Old Testament and obey it. But now Jesus has come and fulfilled it, but they're still Jews. They're just fulfilled Jews, right? They didn't see themselves. That's why he still went to synagogues and preached there stuff. They didn't see themselves as a new religion, just fulfilled the same religion. It's still God's word, right? So, and then he answered the 17 through 19 there, the false accusation that the Asian Jews had seen him in the temple. And he's like, if that's true, then why aren't they here today to testify against me? And so part of Roman law, and an important thing of Roman law that we still have today, they have a right to face their accusers in court. And you still have that right today. And that way it keeps, she said, he said, and a lot of times when you get together in court and actually make them say it under oath, a lot of that goes away. And I'm sure some of it still happens, but that helps a lot. And that was a great, improvement to the law. And so the fact that his accusers weren't even there, was the heart of his defense there. And so, instead of, and there in verse number 20 and 21, he says, or else let these same here say, if they have found evil doing in me while I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. So basically, we already had this court, and that's all I said was, I'm here about the question of the resurrection. And you can even ask these guys about it. And so, basically, they didn't give me a fair hearing. That's all that was said in this hearing. Instead of telling me what I did and pressing the charges and examining me, examining the witnesses, and coming up with the final closing arguments and then deciding fair or guilty, they already had a council to discover all of this, and all they did was let me say one statement about the resurrection, and then the whole disbanded. And so, to bring me up here to retry me is just absolutely ridiculous. And so, they couldn't prove any of their charges, blah, blah, blah. There wasn't anything worth it, except for the fact that Felix did not want to upset these Jews. He wanted to keep them happy. He wanted to preserve the peace. That was his job there. They did not want another Jewish uprising and for them to start fighting again and rebelling and things like that. So, to pacify them, he decided to just do nothing at the time, right? To keep him, we'll just keep him in jail till now. And so that brings us to the third section here about Felix and his foolish attitudes. And this is going to finish out the chapter in verses 22 through 27. It says, and when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, when Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. So he just put it on the back burner, right? Put it off. That way, they can't say, hey, they let this guy out. We're so mad, we're going to rebel. But by putting it on the back burner and saying, we'll mess with it later, we'll hear more about it later, then they don't know the outcome, so there's no reason to rebel. So he was a pretty smooth politician, right? And so, verse 22, I will know the utmost man. Verse 23, and he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, that he should forbid none of his acquaintances to minister or come to him. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. And so, verse number 25, and as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, go thy way for this time, when I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. He hoped also that money should have been given unto him of Paul, that he might lose him, before he sent him the oftener and communed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. And so Paul stays in prison. And so, Felix was not well thought of by history. We've talked about some of the things he's done. We don't really have time to go into right at the time, but it says that in verse 22 that he was well acquainted, perfect. He had more perfect knowledge of that way. So he knew, he wasn't ignorant of the facts. He knew about the Christians and what they believed and their differences with the Jews. And his wife was a Jewess. She kept him informed of the activities and of the people and things like that. And if you see in verse number 23, he's basically got liberty to he's like under house arrest right there, but in the castle, I guess, castle arrest. Now they have ankle monitors, right, to make sure you stay in your house. Then you had a Roman soldier you had to be chained to, but he had the liberty to walk around, and his friends could come and visit him and bring him stuff or whatever. So it wasn't too bad as far as imprisonment was concerned. So Paul was here at least 2 years, and then you know, when Felix came with his wife, and they sent for him, and it says that Paul reasoned with them, right, of 3 things: righteousness, temperance or self-control, and the judgment to come. And so he gave him a 3-point sermon, which is probably 3 pretty good points in any sermon. But Drusilla, his wife, it was her, you know, her father that killed the Apostle James. Her great uncle was the one that killed John the Baptist, and her great grandfather was the one that killed all the babies in Bethlehem. So you can kind of see the line of people that she came from, and the type of people that these are. And so, first of all, you know, as it says, he reasoned of righteousness, and that's a good reason to, if you're trying to win somebody to the Lord, is we need to teach that people are sinners, don't we? And in today's culture, you don't really hear that word very often anymore, do you? Outside of, you know, church and Christian circles. And it's because it's kind of gradually been dropped out of the vocabulary, along with the notion of sin. You know, we make mistakes and have weaknesses and faults and errors, but, you know, in pop culture, you're not going to hear about sin. People are no longer sinful, you know. They're you know, there's always some excuse for what they did. You know, they're immature or underprivileged, or even use the word sick, you know. And you just don't hear that. But so part of convincing somebody that they need the Lord is first to convince them that they're sinful, right? That they have sin that needs to be addressed. And it's getting harder and harder to do that, and for people to understand that and that concept. And then he dealt with self-control, and that's something that we all deal with, that we all struggle with. You know, she had divorced her husband to become his 3rd wife, even though she was a Jewish, and so all this was highly, you know, forbidden for Jews to do. And so she just kind of lived like people do today in today's world. But back then it was a huge deal because she was a Jew, and you just didn't see that back then, hardly ever. And so, and of course, Felix was unscrupulous, and it says here he was hoping that somebody would bribe him to take Paul away, so he'd call him pretty often, you know, hoping somebody would give him some money. That's the kind of person, you know, he was. Just no character at all. And then the 3rd point that Paul preached to him is the judgment to come. You know, somehow we need to get people to understand that there's judgment coming. And brother, I think it was Wednesday night, he was talking about the fact that one day every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And that is a certain sure is coming in our future, is that, you know, past historical facts like this story was certain sure. So we need to be able to get that message to people, don't we? There's coming a judgment for all this sin, and there's going to be a payment, and it's on the calendar, on God's calendar, and it's coming, and we believe it's coming soon. We don't know for sure it's soon, but the Bible does teach that it's coming anytime. You know, the word for that is it's imminent. And so, what is Felix's response to that? Well, it's procrastination, didn't it? When I have a more convenient time, we sing that invitation song, Almost Persuaded. And Felix says that he trembled. And this is the time when these Romans, they prided themselves on their stoicism, you know, and their ability to just, you know, sit back and not get emotional. And so, but he visibly reacted to Paul's sermon and says, Go thy way for this time. When I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. And of course, we all struggle with procrastination. It's said that it's a thief of time. You know, there's an old English proverb that says, one of these days is none of these days. But the Bible teaches in 2 Cornelius chapter 6, verses number 2, I'll read that for you. If I can find it. Come on, Romans, I know you got to end eventually. 1 Corinthians. Oh my goodness, this is hard. And I only use this Bible for preaching. This is not my reading Bible, so the pages are pretty stiff. Okay, first, 2 Corinthians 6:2 said, "For he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted, in the day of salvation I have secured thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." And so, the time to get saved is not later, it's now. That's what the Bible teaches. Whenever you hear the gospel, the time to react to it is right now. Don't put it off. And there may be somebody here in this room today that you've been putting off getting saved. Now, I do need to take care of that, but I'm just not ready yet for whatever reason. Maybe I need to get things right, or maybe I'm not quite ready to make that big change and clean up my life. Whatever the reason is, the Bible teaches that the time for salvation is now, and warns not to put it off. You don't know when you're going to get in a car wreck, or some disease take you immediately, a stroke out or whatever. You don't know how much time you have left. This might be your last day on earth. Do it now. You don't know if you're going to, sin isn't going to take you deeper, and you're never going to get that Holy Spirit conviction again in your life to tell you to get saved. You don't know none of that. So don't put off salvation. Don't put off repenting. Do it now. And so we can look back now and see how foolish that man was, thinking that he could just, I could just take it or leave it. I'll just, mess with it later. And he just refused to break with his sins and turn his life over to the Lord. That's a terrible attitude to have when God so lovingly gave his son to save you from your sin. To just say, I'm just whatever, just a bad attitude toward God's love and God's grace. And so the Lord had been long-suffering towards him, but he just threw it away, didn't he? And that's, of course, the best tactic, and one of the devil's best tactics, is to just put it off, There's a story, you've probably heard it before, that Dr. Clarence McCartney used to say, Satan called his 4 leading demons together and commanded them to think up of a new lie that would trap more souls. I have it, one demon said. I'll go to earth and tell people that there is no God. It'll never work, said Satan. People can look around them and see that there's a God. And the second demon said, I'll go and tell them that there's no heaven. And Satan rejected that idea and said, everybody knows that there's life after death and they want to go to heaven. Let them tell them that there's no hell then, said the third demon. Of course, these demons do tell these lies, don't they? No, conscience tells them their sins will be judged, said the devil. We need a better lie than that. Quietly, a fourth demon spoke. I know. I think I've solved your problem. I'll go to earth and tell everybody that there's no hurry. And that one is the one that y'all agreed was the best one, I guess, because that's what they're still using in Paul's time and today's. But the best time to trust Jesus Christ is now. The best time to tell other people the news of the gospel is now. And maybe you're saved here, but the Lord's been working on your heart. But you need to step it up in some area of your life and get right with him about some area of your life. To take a step of faith and start being a better witness for him, or maybe giving more, or maybe taking on a new job like teaching a Sunday school class, or some kind of ministry like that. And you've been saying, kicking it can down the road, or kicking the can down the road. I'll do it next time, or I'll do it later, or maybe next week. No, the time is now. Don't procrastinate and put things off. The Lord wants you to do. Amen. All right, we'll be able to close for that time. Lord, we're thankful for your time here together. I pray you bless today's service. In Jesus' name, pray. Amen. All right, this next